And my experience with sugaring went from buckets. Actually, if you guys ever heard of Sugar and Spice, I used to collect sap for them and boiled sap for them for a little while. And then when I went off to school at Paul Smith College, I worked for their sugar bush for the 2 years I was there. That was vacuum systems and kind of the more high-end steam away on the evaporator and everything. And then left and had no money, and so I wanted, and had the bug, wanted to continue. So I tried all sorts of things. My first year in my backyard, we just bought the house, and I decided that the wallpaper had to go in our kitchen. So I thought, hey, I'll boil in the kitchen and get rid of the wallpaper. It'll be this great, fantastic it didn't touch the wallpaper, but the tape on the ceiling started to come off. And I've gone anywhere from there to, trying all sorts of different hobby job things to where I'm at now, which is still a pretty small 22 tap hobby operation. So I'll go through that as well as some other things. So just a quick overview of what I want to talk about. This is kind of I'm going to get into a little bit of the investment into it. My numbers come from UVM Extension, so they're geared towards someone that's looking at a big operation. So when you start doing backyard stuff and you start making your own stuff, obviously it starts getting a lot cheaper. Then we're going to talk about just some information about maple trees in general. Move on to quick science behind what makes sap flow. Talk about methods for tapping. Methods for collecting the sap that comes out of the taps, and then boiling and boiling and boiling. If you haven't boiled before, it takes quite a while. And then we'll talk about filtering and canning and storing. And I kind of mentioned this already, but I just want to make sure it's clear that this is geared toward the kind of hobby backyard style operation. It's not going to be looking into commercial stuff, although some of the stuff will pertain to that. So, quick overview on investment. An average sugar bush has about 55 trees per acre on it. Management can make that number go up if you're interested in that. But if you're trying to figure out, quick numbers and you're looking at the property you have, you can assume 55 an acre. On average, this is numbers from sugar makers across the state that UVN looked at. It costs about $55 a tap. So if you have 1,000 taps, 1,000 times 55. That's for if you're not operating a small, make your own stuff kind of style.
That's for the equipment?
Yeah, it's the equipment, building the sugar house, that's the whole caboodle from scratch. Collecting the sap, getting the pan, everything. Minus the investment on property and things like that. It assumes that you will have the property already. An average run. So sugaring season has what we call runs. It's not like all of a sudden the sap's flowing and then it turns off. It comes in spurts. And the average run issues about a gallon of sap per tap. That's assuming you're not using any kind of vacuum system. And an average season has about 8 to 10 runs per season. Oh, and by the way, some of these slides have a ton of information on them. We're going to get into more pictures and talking, but the ones that have this kind of stuff, I printed them off over there, so you don't have to worry about notes if you don't want to. 8 to 10 gallons of sap per tap per year is what you can expect throughout the season. You can obviously increase this number if you add a vacuum, and there's also a different technique we're going to talk about that adds a vacuum without an actual vacuum system. You may be interested in that, if you can get past the line thing. So if you want to do math and you're trying to figure out how much syrup you're going to make, you can expect a gallon of syrup to be made for every 4 to 5 taps. Every tree has a different sugar content. So that changes dramatically, but that's kind of like an average across the state. And these are kind of the average prices you can expect to sell syrup for if you decide you want to go that route. Sap is sold for around 30 cents a gallon on average. That goes up and down depending on the sugar content when you sell it to guys usually. Bulk syrup, I've been told $2 a pound is the average across the state, but I've never dealt in bulk. Does that seem about right?
That's about right.
And I believe it's 11 pounds per gallon of syrup.
Yes.
Syrup, gallons go anywhere from $40. I've seen it as high as $80, but that's kind of crazy. I think it's 64, 62 here.
So can I ask you a question? The
Yeah.
4 to 5 taps per season, that assumes 8 to 10 runs. So
Yes.
a gallon for 10 gallons.
10
gallons of sap is 1 gallon.
No, 40 gallons of sap is
Oh,
1
bigger.
gallon.
Yeah, times 4. Sorry,
Yeah.
forgot that little piece.
Yeah. That's okay. When people lease, that's another option for folks, is to lease land. Or as a sugar maker that doesn't have a whole lot of land, you can choose to lease from folks. I've seen leases go as low as 50 cents and as high as $2 in some areas, in my experience. That's pretty high. Average is usually like $1 a tap. Tapping can decrease the value of your lumber on your trees. So that's something to keep in mind. So if you are managing your woodlot and you're interested in producing a timber product one day, when you tap the most valuable part of that log. So you potentially degrade the value of your tree. There are non-conventional places you can sell, boards with wacky stuff in them. So it's still possible to actually probably make more money on stuff that's tapped, but it's a harder market to get into.
Are there a lot of sugar bush available to lease?
As the county forester, seeing a lot of landowners, I see a lot of properties that are leased, a lot. So there is. I think Merck leases even to a sugar maker. So they're available. And I think
How do you find it?
talk to your neighbors, walk around, find someone that has maple.
Is the vacuum making the timber even less valuable? Like, because I've heard they're starting to see like the effects of vacuum more than just drilling a hole, like around that hole, like basically like the life is sucked out of it. And
We're going to cover that in a little bit. But I'll answer. Well, no, let's wait. Directly to the timber, though, I don't know. I haven't seen a case where that's the tap. You'll see a picture of what it looks like, a board that's been tapped. It's not a normal looking board anymore, obviously. Oh, last point that was on that last slide before it rudely disappeared on me. Don't forget about time. Time is such a large sink in of these kind of things that a lot of people don't account for. Hours and hours and hours of it. All right, so got that mumble jumbo out of the way. Let's go on to the sugar maple tree itself. So it's really important to be able to ID a maple tree. And there's really 3 kind of native maples that you can tap in the area. There's sugar maple, red maple, and silver maple. The traditional one is sugar maple. Red maple is starting to become more popular. Silver maple, have you guys ever heard of the super sweet or the super fast growing trees they sell? Those are all silver maple breeds of a type. So
More of a soft maple type then.
yeah, they're a riparian species. So if you go to the Otter Creek, you'll find them growing along the edge of the Otter Creek. Yeah. And I don't want to get into too much of the ID, but these pictures are available over there just because we only have about an hour to talk. So I want to bust through some stuff. But I do want to mention a few things, differences between the maples. Sugar maples are very good healers. They're almost our best healer that I'm aware of in our forest. That's the opposite for red maple. They are bad. Once they get some kind of rot moving through them, it tends to go through the whole tree. UVM has done a lot of studies on the effects of tapping sugar maple. I believe they're just starting on the red maple to look at the effects of that. It's not really known on a scientific level how much our tapping affects red maple. And I don't know anything about silver maple as far as tapping goes. It's kind of a new thing to tap. I've never done it, and I know it's a bad healer as well, just like red maple. Sugar content in sugar maple is high. It's usually about 2% on average. Sugar content in red maple is very low. It takes about 80 gallons of sap from a red maple to make 1 gallon of syrup on average. Silver maple, they've been showing some breeds of it, versions of it, to have a higher sugar content than sugar maple.
My nephew tapped my mother's soft maple or silver.
Yeah, did he test it?
2.5.
2.5. Yeah, so that's not out of the ordinary for a really super sweet sugar maple to get up there, but that's pretty good. And then kind of where you find them, sugar maple likes rich, moist soils, red maple likes poor soils, and silver maple likes wet soils. It tends to grow along the edge of rivers. Okay, moving on from there. What makes the sap flow? So sap is essentially, it's a difference in pressure between the inside of the tree and the atmosphere on the outside of the tree. And as the temperature goes up and down, above and plays that game, going above freezing, below freezing, the pressures change in the tree. And so when it's cold, trees have a negative pressure in it. And in fact, if you have like lines, they can suck soap right back up into them. And this is when they tend to pull moisture out of the ground, is at night when it's cold. They pull it up and it goes up into the tree and starts gathering sugars. And then when it warms up the next day, the sap that came out the night before actually starts to flow down and out of the tree as the tree gains a positive pressure. And then it flows out, bringing the sugars along with it. A lot of people think that the sap is coming from the roots, and it kind of is, but it's going up into the tree and hanging out, and then when it warms up, it's coming down and out. And obviously, if you use a vacuum system, and that's the whole point behind them, is to accelerate the difference in the pressure, so that you can even get runs when you normally wouldn't. All right, so moving on to tapping. So we're going to get right into what you were saying. Does tapping hurt a tree? UVM Extension is currently doing a pretty large study on the differences if what we're taking out of the tree is affecting the tree, just like what you were talking about. They have control trees where they're not tapping at all. They have trees on a normal gravity type system, and they have trees on a vacuum system. And it's too early to tell where that's headed. But as of right now, there isn't a difference in the growth rates of the trees. So it doesn't seem to, what you take out of the tree doesn't seem to affect it.
But how you take it out, they haven't.
Well, they have one, so like I said, the study is it hasn't been long enough to make any conclusions over. It's been like are you aware of it? It's like 1 or 2 years into it. What they've seen so far is growth rates on all 3 trees, ones that haven't been tapped, ones that have been tapped with gravity feed, and ones that have quite high vacuum on it. I think they went as high as like 25. Normal vacuums are like 20, 21, 22 sometimes. And they haven't seen a change in growth rates yet. That doesn't mean they won't over time. It's only been a short
Have they
time.
seen any change in the foliage on top of the tree during the summer?
I believe that study was just looking at growth rates, so diameter growth rates. I'm unaware if they were looking at crown or what.
I've heard stories that the people are seeing sunshine come through the foliage.
Well, that may be for another reason that I'm going to cover right now. So the problem, if you've heard of overtapping trees, you can overtap a tree. The damage you do isn't what you take out of it. Well, we don't think the damage that you do to a tree is what you take out of it. But we got to go back to talk a little bit about chemistry a little bit. So if you don't recognize that thing on the screen, oh yeah, who knows what, I keep forgetting the candy. Jim White and then geez. Who can tell me what molecule this is on the screen right here? Anybody? Water. Water. All right, we got 2 going. I tend to get on rants. If you look at this water molecule, and we have to kind of start there. I don't know the reason, but for whatever reason, hydrogen molecules tend to line up on one side of the molecule with oxygen on the other, similar to what you're seeing there. And the oxygen molecule has a stronger pull to the electrons, so the electrons hang out with the oxygen a lot more than with the hydrogen. And what happens is because we have more electrons on the oxygen side, we get a what kind of charge?
positive?
Negative. Electrons are negative. Man, I had one ready to go. And then on the hydrogen side, because we have protons and not much electrons anymore, we get a positive charge. So water is actually like tiny little magnets. And you can see that evident when you look at things like if you fill a glass of water up too high, you can see the water stay above the brim of the glass. That's because the water is essentially magnetizing itself. Eventually the gravity overwhelms it and it flows over. You can do it by looking at water pooling on your car or on your windshield. You notice that it tends to collect in these areas that aren't flat. You'll notice it's bulged up because it's magnetizing towards each other. It's attracted to each other. That's why dew shows up on grass. And it also is why capillary action works, which is what's important to us. So if you remember back to high school, if you stick a tube into a liquid, you'll see the liquid actually move up into the tube. And the skinnier that tube is, the higher the liquid will move up. And that's because the little water molecules in there are actually attracted to the edge of the glass and to each other. So they pull each other up. And if you look at this one here, you'll see that there's an upward force on the edges and a gravity force in the middle. So the wider that is, the higher the water can go. The skinnier it is, however, the higher the water can go. And that's completely how plants move nutrients and water up and down. Capillary, there's no pumps in there, it's just normal capillary action. It just, the water travels right up into the seed, right up into the leaves. And in a tree, that happens in the middle of the tree. And then it goes up and it goes into the leaves, and the leaves make sugar for the rest of the tree. And then they send it down just inside the bark. Do you guys see this green layer here? That's called the cambium layer. It's really the only part in the trunk of a tree that's really truly still has live cells in it. There's other live cells throughout in the rays, but that's the main section with live cells. So the nutrients from the leaves come down just on the outside, just under the bark, and they feed that cambium. And that cambium divides and then stops. That's why we get growth rings on a tree. But, well, that's what I was going to talk about that I just talked about. So what do you think happens knowing that to a tree if we do this to it?
Kill it.
Kills it, yeah. All the nutrients are still able to go up through the center of it. Capillary action is still taking place. But when the nutrients get to that point there, they basically run out onto the ground. So everything below that, all the cambium doesn't get fed, dies, the roots die. The tree will hold on for years. It's called girdling. It's actually a technique to try to make a dead standing tree for wildlife or something. That's what that was done for. But that tree's dead and it just doesn't know it yet. And if you look at a tree that's tapped, you can essentially do the same thing to that tree. This right here is showing old taps that the tree has grown around. Trees don't regenerate cells like animals do. They instead block off rot and diseases when a tree gets injured, and then they grow around it.
Wait, so after it's been tapped and you've killed the cambium layer, does a new cambium layer grow?
You don't kill all the
year?
cambium layers. So you have cambium all along the outside of this.
Oh, and it doesn't matter.
And
if
you
it's
poke
break
one
it?
hole in it, and you do kill, and actually if you look at this one, this is kind of looking at it up and down, and this is what a board would look like if you cut a tree like that. The rot has moved, and because of those vascular system that the capillary action is taking place, the rot's able to move up and down quicker. So that's why these are much longer than they are wider. So the trick is, what you want to do is, if you know how fast your tree's growing, you want to make sure that you're adding new wood and outgrowing those tap holes before the tree, and allowing the tree to still survive. If you every year come out, like let's say you started on a 6-inch tree and every year you started putting a hole in it, you would eventually you would be doing more damage than the speed at which that tree is growing. And you would eventually girdle it. And just like that other tree, it would look alive for a while, but its roots would die, and then that would be the end of it. That's probably what happens to those trees that would be my guess, is that they're being over-tapped or too aggressively tapped. I don't know for sure, but
You
that would
can't
be my
tap the same hole every year?
No, when a tree gets a wound, it blocks off that wound and then grows around it. So it blocks it off, so there's no way for a new sap to get through it. Yep, so you create a new one every year. UVM put out this tapping guideline, based on the average growth rate of a sugar maple and the diameter of the tree. So if you were to follow this and your tree wasn't an extra slow grower, you wouldn't kill it. So this is the recommendation that comes out of UVM. So you'll notice these are two tap sizes. These are kind of like, the only time you really see those anymore, the 7/16 are like on the old buckets.
That's what I have.
Yeah,
Yeah.
7/16
Okay,
inch.
yeah.
You can actually purchase a 5/16 inch.
The blue ones?
Well, you have to look at it. I
Okay.
mean, I don't know, color. The ones that I'm talking about, the old, are usually like metal,
Okay, yeah.
and they kind of like cringe together at the
Yeah.
top. So if you're interested in leasing land to a sugar maker, you're going to want to make sure they're following this. In fact, I would suggest you have a written agreement with them and you have this put right into it. Actually, I should also state that at Paul Smith's, they were doing a lot of work on the amount of sap getting drawn out of a tree, and they were finding on certain diameter trees you could have one tap on a vacuum system and yield the same amount of sap as if you would if you put two taps into it, just because the negative pressure is able to suck the same amount out of one little hole as it is two. So you can actually reduce the amount of holes you poke in when you add a vacuum system to it, and still increase your sap production. And so far, the studies show that extra sap taken out isn't hurting the tree, but it's still too early to tell for sure. So this is what a wound looks like. So we're going to get into tapping in a minute, but you can kind of imagine that wound underneath it, going up and down for a ways, and then maybe going out about here or so. So that's wood you wouldn't be able to tap the next year you went to tap it. You'd want to be aware of where your holes are. There's actually one here that's quite overgrown. So that's where the tree is recovered completely. So knowing what you know about potentially girdling trees, what do you guys think of this one?
Oh, wow.
So first thing that popped up when I typed in bad tapping on Google. It's like, I don't even know what those pipes are. You can see the sap running below the taps too, so it's not even.
Oh, boy.
Tapping itself. So the method you want to use, first off, is you want to get a really good drill bit. And you want to make sure that drill bit is matched up to the same size as your stuff. A nice good wood drill bit. If you have ones that are not making a good clean cut, the tree may react and heal quicker, and then you'll run dry. Plus, if you're getting into a vacuum system, you want to have a nice straight drill. You don't want to do this with it at all and have and introduce a section where there won't be a good seal where you'll get a vacuum leak.
Okay.
You drill the holes at a slightly up angle. And about 3.5 inches is what UVM is suggesting to get the optimal flow.
So that's into the cambium layer.
That's past the cambium
Yeah, so you
layer.
want past it.
You're drying. So I should have.
So that one where you said the water goes up and the sap comes down, the sap isn't coming down.
Yeah, you're not
through
collecting the
cambium.
stuff coming down. There's no leaves on the tree. The tree has a bunch of stored energy within it,
Yeah.
and when the water sucks in, it's getting diluted into the water that's sucked into it, and then you pull that out with the water you pull out, or the sap out with it. You're actually getting stuff from like the middle of the tree.
So you're pulling what's going up, not what's coming down.
It goes up and down as the temperature goes up and
It just hasn't
down.
gotten to the top of the tree.
Besides
Yeah.
syrup or sap, what purpose does the sap serve for the tree's sake?
It's energy. It's its energy
Okay.
source. It's what it uses to. Trees do their most vigorous growing right when they first start growing. We're going to mention that later, but and they have to put out all those leaves. And sugar maple and red maple tend to put flowers out before the leaves even come out. So it uses energy for the flowers, for the leaves, and for that extremely vigorous growth right at the beginning of the year.
What's that mean, aim for clean wood?
Yeah, so that means don't drill into, remember those rotten spots that I showed? If you drill into one of those, you're not going to get any sap. So what you want to see is your sawdust to be nice, white, and clean. If you start seeing like brown, you've messed up.
Yeah, okay.
And generally, unless you're tapping really early, you'll see a fresh tap flows like crazy. So you'll know if
It's gonna work.
you messed up. Follow those tapping guidelines so you don't kill your tree. When you're actually putting the tap into it, and you've probably recognized this at this point. Nice gentle taps, it'll slowly sink in. You're not trying to hammer it in there, you're just trying to plug up the seal basically. So nice gentle taps, and you'll hear the sound change all of a sudden. And so you just kind of ding, 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 and then when that sound changes, you know you've made it and you stop. If you come back later and you start to see a little bleeding underneath the tap, though, that means you messed up. Either your hole is oval, you didn't make a nice straight one, or you didn't get it in far enough. Check for leaks, that's what I just said. And then you want to make sure you pull taps before the buds break, and there's 2 reasons to do that. One is that the syrup you make tastes like crap. It's called buddy syrup. It's a defect. The taste will just be dramatically different, and it's pretty awful. And anyone know the other reason? I kind of mentioned it once.
They'll seal up.
They'll seal up. It's when they do their most vigorous. You're racking it. It's when they do their most vigorous growth. It's right when they first wake up. So you want that wound to heal quickly. So you want that tap out of there so the tree can.
When do we
react to
know,
it.
I mean, they're really high up, so how do you know when the buds are starting to break?
So sugar maple is one of the, not the latest, but one of the later ones.
Okay.
Red maple is one of the, and silver maple is like the first one.
Okay.
And then red maple, and then after that you'll see the sugar maple go. So if you only have sugar maples, I would keep an eye on silver
I'm not
maples
sure
and
what I
red
have.
maples.
I think I have sugar maples and I think I have red maples. But
Okay.
Some aren't delivering much sap. I'm thinking that might be the red maple.
I don't think that'll.
It doesn't have much to do with that?
It's
Okay.
just that the sugar content is lower.
Okay.
Yeah. Have you noticed in the spring, or you should look for it this year, you'll be driving around, you'll kind of notice a hillside start to turn
Yeah.
reddish.
I've
That's the red maple blooming.
Okay.
So when you see that, you're like, oh, the red maple buds are popped, the sugar maple's not going to be far behind.
Okay. Okay.
All right, so tapping is done. Now let's talk about actually collecting the sap. So there's a bunch of different methods. One is buckets, and generally the old buckets, the old style was done with a 7/16 inch tap. New taps are done with 5/16 inch taps. The big difference is that they heal faster. They seem, according to UVM, they yield the same amount of tap on a gravity system. So there's not really any reason to use the 7/16 unless you're using your grandfather's setup and you like the idea of doing that or something. The other way is gravity-fed lines, and those are traditionally done with a 5/16 inch line now. Though I'm here to tell you today that it's kind of at this point outdated. And you may say, well, I might not want to use a vacuum system. Hold on, and you'll see why I put the big X on that one. Commercial operations tend to use a large-scale vacuum system. There's a place in Sandgate right now that's attempting to put 250,000 taps in. They have multiple 4-inch main lines coming down. It's crazy.
Did you ever been to Island Pond and see Sweet Tree's operation?
No.
400,000 taps.
Jeez, I'm crow. Yeah, syrup's turning into big business now, and
2 years
companies
ago,
are
they made
taking it.
105 55-gallon barrels of syrup in one day.
That's crazy. I can't even imagine. I make 6 gallons in a season with my syrup.
I'm on my 3rd gallon, I think.
The next one is there's this new line, a 3/16 inch line that's come out. You still use a 5/16 inch tap, but the line itself is even skinnier. And we're going to definitely talk about that in a little bit. And that's why I have the X on the 5/16 because this is available. I don't see any reason to use the 5/16 inch.
And it's all for healing purposes.
Same size hole for both, actually. Yeah, we're going to get into why I'm saying that. It's more production based. And then, of course, there's the figure out your own way to do it. This is an interesting one I saw that I just had to include. And so I'm going to, and some people are even starting to combine the vacuum system with 3/16 inch lines to get kind of the advantage of both. But I'm going to focus on these 3 aspects today because I'm not, like I said, this is not commercial operation, so we're not going to talk about vacuum systems. So let's start with buckets, really quick. Some advantages to buckets are they're very pleasing to the eye. I mean, not only are they there collecting sap for you, but personally, I love the look of it. It's very Vermont. There's an extreme historical appeal to them. You know, for years, that's how it's been done with horses. This is a more modern, I found it online, but there's a guy, Sonny Perimsky, who does this with horses and buckets still. He's pretty cool. I mean, that's really cool. Obviously, it's a ton of work, and you're not making the kind of production that you are with a vacuum system. They don't require any vertical drop, so you can have them on flat ground, you can have them below your sugar house. You don't need any kind of vertical gravity style thing to feed the lines. Tons of extra work, that's the negative side. This guy came up with a pretty cool thing that I wish I had when I worked at Sugar and Spice.
That's great.
Yeah.
Except when I fell the other day, I would have dropped both buckets.
Yeah. I have 10 of mine are on buckets, and I've started using 2 5-gallon instead of 1 just to balance myself out. Be aware tap size if you do decide to go the bucket route. You can buy old buckets, and they are the old school 7/16 inch tap. But you can go to most dealers and they can convert your buckets so they can handle 5/16 inch. Price for buckets, it's about $20 for the buckets, and then you pay the top separate. I added $10 in for the top. That may not be accurate, so somewhere between $20 and $30. I made an assumption that it was
Try
$10.
$6.50.
$6.50. Okay, there we go. 20
Used buckets and
27.
taps. $6.50.
Okay. Oh, for the bucket?
For plus the top, you're probably
You're talking a galvanized bucket?
It depends where you go.
the used aluminum buckets with a top, with a tap. $8 maybe.
It depends.
Score.
I've seen them really high.
Yeah.
I've seen them really
I bought mine for $20.
Buy it, 'cause it's
The guy
probably
threw the
right.
tops in for me.
You get those at a retail outlet somewhere or a private sale?
You can get them on the internet. Just search used buckets, but there's
Careful with used stuff.
But the aluminum stuff.
Aluminum's good.
Because I hear they're going to start cracking down on the galvanized lead.
Yeah, there's a lot of old equipment that has lead in it, and that's the issue with buying used.
The only
stuff.
place I know that sells used buckets is in Pittsburgh. There's CDL maybe on Route 7. They sell buckets still. The one in Rutland, that store doesn't sell buckets. But they'll work with you there.
Thank you. No, that's great.
I'd save, $20.
At the end of every season, you need to clean them, so there is a larger maintenance with them as well. And if you have a metal tap, a good trick to do is to boil them, and then you can reuse them. If you start getting a lot of microbial life on your taps and you reuse them, then your taps they close up quicker. The tree reacts to it faster. But metal ones are great. You can boil them and then reuse them. No extra special tools needed with this, so that's a huge bonus. Those friggin' tools are expensive. All right, so let's move on to the 3/16 inch tubing. This is a picture at my house, actually. 12 of mine are on 3/16 inch. I did it mostly for fun, just to try it out. I don't have a operation that I'm too worried about production. But really quick, the difference between 3/16 and 5/16 is that they can create a natural vacuum faster. And the way this works is if you think about a straw and a soda, you ever seen that? You pick it up. If you could picture that straw being so big that the weight of that liquid inside started wanting to come out and squeezing the straw, that's essentially what happens. UVM did a study where and it can happen with a 5/16 inch line too. I should say that it can. It just takes a lot more sap to fill that up. You need it to be completely full, and then you gain that vacuum effect. The 3/16 inch was UVM did a study on all sorts of different diameters, and that was the one that hit the vacuum at the most regular basis and didn't restrict the flow of the sap to the point where it didn't make any sense. The vacuum is affected by elevation change. So it's not the length of the line, it's the difference between the highest point and the lowest point. I don't have much of an elevation change at my house, so I was kind of like debating it, and I was like, what the heck, I'll try it. I get 16 PSI at the top, so I was really impressed with that. I've seen guys get 22. Andy Hutchinson's getting 20, 22 on some of his lines. So, and that's about where you set the vacuum, a regular vacuum. And that's all done naturally without a machine doing it for you. It's just using the natural world. And another difference between this is the 5/16 inch line. The theory was little trees on it as possible. That way you're not restricting the flow. And this one they did a study on the number of trees with a 3/16 inch line. And they found that up to 20, I think they're recommending 24 on a line. It fills up that line quicker and doesn't seem to restrict the flow to the point where it makes a huge difference in production. What about this system versus vacuum? There are definitely advantages to the vacuum. 360, less work and less energy. I don't know if you guys have ever tried to put up a main line, but if you're using vacuum systems, which are those big ones that you saw in that picture, they're a huge pain in the neck. Like, you string a wire through, you tighten it, then you run your line and you like cinch. It's a lot of work. It's much faster just to throw out the 3/16 inch lines. But it only works when the sap's running. That's the disadvantage to this system compared to the vacuum. So a day like yesterday, my 3/16 inch line didn't run. I have a south-facing slope. It didn't get cold enough the night before. But if I had a vacuum system, I would have pulled out just as much syrup as I would have otherwise. It can create that negative pressure difference even when it doesn't really exist. So you can get runs on days you normally wouldn't. Vacuum systems also have even pressure. So in a 3/16 inch line, the tree at the top gets the most pressure, the tree at the bottom gets the least. And it's all about the elevation change from whatever specific tree you're tapped to where it leaves the line. Where a vacuum system, it's solid the whole way through, the same amount. Some sugar makers are trying to figure out how to combine them. Compared to buckets, lines stay up all year, so it's less work. You just simply, you pull the tap still, but they hang out by the tree, and they just stay up there all year. And when you tap it again, you just have to bang it in. You have to carry all your buckets back into the woods with you. So it's a heck of a lot less work. The sap comes to you, so you don't have to go around collecting it, which is another huge bonus as far as saving yourself some time. It can be considered an eyesore, however. A lot of people don't like the looks of them. My dad has a really nice maple stand that I've been trying to convince him to tap for years, and I'm not willing to do buckets on it, and he's not willing to let me do lines. So there it sits. They recommend that you replace the lines every 5 to 8 years. So every 5 to 8 years, you're redoing the whole system. If you have a vacuum system, you can actually, as you pull, stick it into a cleaning solution and have the cleaning solution move through the line, and then you can make them last longer. So that's another disadvantage of this over vacuum. Taps should be replaced every season. You don't reuse taps. They're plastic, you can't boil. I guess you could try to boil them, but they're like 26 cents each. You cut the thing, you put another one on, you throw it in the tree. And there's ones with check valves in them now that let the sap come out but not go in. So when you get that negative pressure, when it gets cold at night and you start getting that negative pressure, and I said it could suck the sap back in, they prevent that from happening. Which helps, microbes can grow in the line, and then the tree sucks it in, and then the tree starts to shut down your tap quicker. Sorry. They require leak prevention, especially from squirrels. Boy, working at Paul Smith's with the lines, it seems like all I did was go out there looking for squirrel leaks. They chew on the things, and then the vacuum system no longer works.
What kind of squirrel is that?
That's the rare. That's the rare sap line eliminator.
I'll look out for him.
Yeah. Lines also require special tools, and we'll get into that too. So here's some wording so you understand. When the line that goes from the tree into this line, this right here is known as a drop line. And then the lines that all the drop lines are flowing into, so all these here are known as lateral lines. And then if you have a vacuum system and you also use a main line, the lateral lines essentially run into the main lines. So if you guys are deciding to do this method, here's two things you'll need to pick up. This is a T, and it's right here in that one. So it essentially lets the lateral line come straight through it, and then your drop line connects to that goes to the tree. And I'll go into how you put them together and stuff. And then obviously you need a tap. And this one has the check valve. See the little ball in it? You can see the check valve. And so this actual part here is 5/16 inches. This part here is 3/16 inches. That actual picture is both the whole thing is 5/16 inch because I couldn't find a picture of the right one. But when you get a 3/16 inch one, you'll still be using a 5/16 inch tap. The other parts you need are, these are end pieces. There's a bunch of different versions of this, but essentially at the very end of your line, you use tubing to go through this, around the tree to hold it, and then go back to this. And then this acts like your tap for that tree, and this part acts like, connects to the lateral line. Straights, you need tons of straights. You need a bunch of those on hand at all times. Those friggin' squirrels are always chewing, especially that one. They're always chewing holes in your line, and you fix it by essentially cutting it and then using a straight to connect it to get past the. And Ys,
It's one big straight line.
Ys aren't recommended unless there's no other way to do it. And I don't really know the reasoning. It used to be a big thing, line, and then you spread your lines out and they'd all come together. But people are recommending you try to stay away from Ys as much as possible. You can still get them. And if you look at the prices, they're all pretty freaking cheap. I mean, even this is a 3/16 inch line. $47 is a little more than you'd expect for that. But it's 800 feet. That's quite a bit. These are two examples of tubing tools and the prices that they cost. If you buy them at Leader, I'm sure you can find them for cheaper. I hate this one. This one is designed to, it's supposed to be designed to put the tap onto the drop line at the end, but if you look at the angle, it opens like this, so you can never get the stupid thing to line up. But if you get one of these, the way it's designed, the piece goes straight in and out instead of like at an angle. So then you can. This is actually designed to. Actually, the next picture shows what it does. It's designed so that it clips onto the line on each side. And if you were fixing a squirrel bite, you would essentially put that on each side of the squirrel bite, cinch it down, you would cut the squirrel bite out, and that would hold your line together. And then you take your straight piece, and the whole thing comes together, and it pushes the line together. But you can also use that to put taps in. I have absolutely no problem putting taps on with my tubing tool. It's the only one I need to do lines with. And I prefer to carry around a shear with me as well. These have, if you look on it here, there's kind of a blade here. This one kind of shows it a little bit. It's this weird thing sticking up. That's designed to cut it, but I find it a big pain in the neck, and it never cuts them straight, and then it makes it hard to put them together. I like just a regular pair of garden shears, bite shears or something. To me, it works a million times better. So things to do when you're doing this. Obviously, sap runs downhill. It seems like common sense, but I've seen some bushes as I've walked around properties where I'm just like, what? And I strongly recommend that you use a level. I've got a spot on my line that my brother, every time he goes to it, he's telling me that it's not, but you put the level on it and it's flowing downhill. It's just the way the topography is right there. It looks funny. That's my favorite kind of level to use, and I like to put it on the downhill tree, right at the downhill tree. So if you had a sag in the line, that's where you're going to read it the most. The line itself isn't screwed or attached to the trees other than the two ends of it. If you look at this picture, you can see it's wrapped around the trees and there's just tension on it. And and they're designed to stretch if like a branch falls on them or something. And if that happens, you take that tubing tool and you cut out a section and make it smaller, and you put the tension back on it. And another suggestion is before you go out in the field, make your own drop lines. So if you remember what those were? Those were these things. So if you make a bunch of those before you go out, then it's much easier as you're going, instead of like building them in the woods as you're going. And keep those, oh, I didn't say that, did I? Oh, I did, but I didn't mention it. Keep those drop lines long, longer than you think you want them to be. Because remember how we talked about searching for whitewood before? You want to be able to have that reach around the backside of the tree so you can utilize the whole tree. You don't want this little tiny thing that can only go to a couple spots on the tree. Okay, so on to the hobjobbies.
That was success.
Sometimes costs can be much cheaper, but my experience with trying to hobjob things is it ends up costing me more money in the long run, and then I end up buying the thing I would have bought anyway. So if you're a little more thrifty than I am, you should be able to. I'm going to throw a couple out just for fun. People are looking like they're getting a little sleepy.
My sugar level.
Oh, there you go. There's one more. Oh, one more in the bag. All right. They're really fun to experiment with, though. I mean, if you're the kind of guy that likes to tinker, it's great fun to try to come up with all sorts of stuff. But I got to say this, though. Only use food-grade products. So I drive around, and it drives me. I'm grateful that I make my own sometimes. You guys ever seen something like this? People are collecting them in trash bins. There's a place, you'll see it on the side of the road all over the place. These are not food grade plastics.
No.
They're full of toxins. There's no standard about the dyes used in them. Just make sure you're using food grade material. And if you're using used food grade material, make sure you knew what was in it beforehand. This is a guy, I can't decide if those are food grade or not, but I found that one online. These definitely are. That's a pretty good concept. My aunt did that.
So attractive.
Yeah, very. This guy's my favorite one I found. He's using a nice trash bin. I hope you guys don't know him. I just found it on Google. And it's a good reminder too to remember that if you're with equipment in the woods, you're driving around the woods, this is the muddiest time of year when you do the most damage. And sugar maple in particular is really susceptible to root compaction. So trying to limit the amount of, if you're going to use that kind of stuff, just try to make it clear, and the ground isn't frozen, try to pick a path and stay on it. All right, so once you have all the sap, then you have to store it in a container, right? And there's kind of two options if you're not going to jimmy rig something. I've seen totes used. That was another good one for this kind of stuff. You can go the stainless steel route, or you can go the plastic route if you're buying for any commercial operation. And the stainless steel are super expensive, and I do have prices that you'll get to see, and it'll be in the handout so you can kind of compare. They're real wicked easy to clean, though. Man, are they easy to clean. A couple of brush strokes with a brush and rinse out, and they're done. And they tend to make higher quality syrup, and I'll explain why in a second. The plastic ones cost a lot less, and there's a reason for that. Besides the material, they're a lot harder to clean. They tend to not be as, even if they look smooth to you and they feel smooth, they're not. If you look up, there's a lot of places where microbes can live inside plastic, which makes microbes and sap tend to make lower quality syrup. And so you just, no matter how much you clean those things, you just can't kill them. But they're a lot more I use a plastic one, and I just enjoy my dark syrup. So how big? Like how big should your container be? Well, a rule of thumb that I've heard bounced around is take the amount of taps you have, multiply it by 2, and that's about how much you should get for a gallon tank. So if you think about that, if an average run runs about a gallon, doubling that ensures that you're not going to have any sap flowing on the ground. You can. My brother's thinking about building one, and he was kind of like, he's kind of pushing the envelope, so we'll see how many times he gets sap on the ground. If you make your own, I just want to again say, know what the container had in the container, and again, food grade only. So here's a price from a catalog. It's kind of hard to see probably for you guys, but oh no, actually it's much better on this TV. So this is the size of them, and then all the way on the other side is the price. They're very expensive. Very expensive. This is a price list of the plastic ones, much more affordable. Generally smaller in size too, because they're generally targeted for someone like me that has, used to do it all the time and wants to still, but has a 7-acre backyard. What's
How long do you
that?
let the sap sit around before you start boiling it?
Depends on how cold it is. The quicker the better. I mean, it's sugar water, so it's gonna be a fantastic place for microbes to hang out and enjoy. So the faster the better.
So I've seen, I opened a bucket, I guess it'd been there a couple of days, a little cloudy, so I got rid of it because I made that mistake before. I made some and it didn't taste good.
Yeah, I've made cloudy stuff
Yeah.
before. And
Not
it's a
the
little-
best.
I mean,
That's just from letting the bucket sit on the tree for too long?
No,
It's from-
in the container, it was just a little too
Oh, in
warm.
the container that was.
Early on, it was a
sitting
little warm. a
Yeah.
couple
yeah, and you
days.
can do, my favorite technique, because I'm kind of a weekend warrior when it comes to this stuff, is I love to, when I know it's getting cold, not boil it all and let a huge chunk of ice freeze in it. And then as it comes in, I have this chunk of ice, keeping it cool. But it's still not as good as coming home and boiling it every day,
Yeah.
by any means. If I was trying to sell it, I wouldn't do it the way I do it. Okay, so that was collecting sap. Now onto the boiling.
Yeah, this is, yeah.
Time.
So it takes about 40 gallons of sap to make 1 gallon of syrup. And if you look at that, I like this picture. I don't know where that is, but it's great because it really gives you that vision. And so all but one of these needs to be evaporated away in your system. So it is a ton of work and a ton of time. And I'm going to warn you right now, if you think you want to make this in your kitchen, go ahead and try. So you can see this, and I had this. So one time I thought I would boil outside and I would finish in my kitchen after my first debacle. And I had my brother and my dad outside, and they're boiling away, and I'm trying to measuring and finishing this one on the stove, and my brother starts panicking about something. So I literally left for 2 minutes. I come back,
Yeah.
those sap just went right on the top. My wife was very impressed with me. I had to pull the whole stove out and scrub. It was awful. So just, and I kind of knew I shouldn't be doing that. I did it anyway. So just don't do it if you can. So how do you size if you're going to get something outside or make something outside, how do you size it? How do you know how big of one you should get? Well, that depends on a lot of stuff. How many taps you have is obviously a really big one, but another big one that a lot of people don't tend to consider is how much time they want to spend boiling. Because you could boil 100 taps on my little boiler, but it would take you, way too long. And so there's an equation you can do, and I'm going to share that with you guys now. What you need to know are 3 things: pans, or actually you only need to know 2 of these things, and then you can use those to figure out the third. So the size of your pan, the hours you want to spend boiling, and the number of taps that you have. We're getting close to time. So here it is. N is equal to the number of taps, H is equal to the hours you're going to spend boiling, and E is equal to what's called the evaporation rate. So when you buy a pan from a dealer, generally they'll have an evaporation rate. It'll be 20 gallons per hour, is what and then you can replace 20 with E in any of these equations and figure out, so for example, if you know how many taps you have and how much time you want to spend, you can figure out how big of a size pan you want. If you know how big of a pan you have and how much time you want to spend, you can figure out how many taps you should do. And vice versa. If you know how many taps you have and you're stubborn and you're going to use the pan you have, that's how long it's going to take you to do it. And here are some pan sizes with the average evaporation rate for them. Here's the one I use, and actually I've got it up to 7 now with some techniques I did. So very pleased with that. And again, I don't want to spend too much time because we're getting low. Those numbers are all in that thing you're welcome to grab on your way out. So I want to talk about this. A lot of people think they're going to do this. They're just going to take a big pan, fill it right up, boil it right down. Well, very inefficient. There's heat going everywhere. It's not concentrated. And there's another issue. you're supplying about that much heat to that pan, and you have about that much of the pan getting rid of heat. Not efficient whatsoever. And if you have to get rid of remember those milk cans, how many you have to boil off? Boy, that takes longer than I'm willing to invest. But this is a little better. This is another little hob jobby. These are like the things that you sell. You put like food in, food trays. I've seen a lot of things made out of those. This one's a little better. The main thing being this, I mean it's quite a bit better. The main thing being this is you have that much heat entering the sap area and that much losing it. But you still in the front are still losing some heat out that door that you're not able to close. So your evaporation rates aren't going to be too good. How about this one? I'll just use an old wood stove I have and throw a pan on top. Again, a little better because you're spreading that sap out. But stoves are made to push heat out. They're not made to concentrate heat into an area. So they're not efficient. You're losing a ton of heat to the atmosphere. It's not being concentrated onto that pan. You ever seen these guys, the barrel systems? These are a little better. A lot of times you line them with brick or something to help maintain the heat. It's got a closed door in the front, so that there's still a bit of heat loss, but much better, much better. This, however, is where they may be losing some of their efficiency. So they have a bucket. It appears to be a bucket up there. I'm assuming it's slowly dripping sap into the system. The problem is that sap is probably cold. So every time they drip into it, the temperature they raise the sap up to boil out of is dropping. There's a lot of preheater systems that you can use that you attempt to get the sap at a higher temperature when it enters your main boil so that you don't lose any of that efficiency. And that's how I'm getting more than that thing said with my little hob job. Yeah, this one's pretty cool. I just had to throw that one in there. It looks like
It's the oil burner right now.
Yeah.
Call it the basement.
So, I guess the main point is, depending on your ingenuity, I mean, you can come up with all sorts of things. Certain ones are better than others. This one looks like it's got two pans going at once, so that's kind of cool. Here's what I made. I'll share with you. I've had an old, when I bought my house, had an old sheet metal stove. I cut it in half with a grinder, and I got a metal worker to make me a C-shaped metal piece. Cost me about $40. I put it on the center of it, measured. Oh, you can kind of see. Here's my pan. I bought a used pan, did a lead test on it, make sure there wasn't any lead in it. It's a 2 by 2.5. So I increased the length, set the length to the size of the pan. Welded it together. It was a real crappy weld job because I'm not a good welder, and the metal on the stove itself was all bent, so there was only a couple spots I could connect it. Lined the whole thing with brick to maintain the heat, so I wouldn't be, stoves are gonna throw heat out. And that's my little homemade arch that I boil 6 gallons a year. You'll notice I cut the top off too. The pan sits directly on top and is exposed directly to the fire. And there's, I don't have a good picture of it, but actually you can see it better in the next one here. There's it's like an insulation that's made, you can buy it at most dealers. It's made to go between your pan and your arch, and it kind of makes a seal so that the smoke and heat can't escape essentially through the edges. So that's my little pan, and this is my preheating system right here. I use 3-gallon things I bought at Walmart, and I fill those up with cold sap, stick them on the back of the stove, and I alternate them. So I add one about every 20 minutes, so I boil away about 3 gallons every 20 minutes on that system.
That's amazing.
This is another home jobby that I'm very proud of. This is my sap height measuring device. So on systems that I have been used to before, they have what's called a float that automatically control the level of your sap, and you can set a certain level of sap. Mine doesn't have that. So I built this thing to make sure I don't burn my pan. And if you get too low, you will caramelize the sugars and that pan will be no good. No good.
2 pans yesterday.
2 pans, yeah.
Oh, yep. Yeah.
What's that smell?
Yeah. And it happens quick.
Quickly.
How do you know? Like, how do you know when it's when it's boiled the way it's supposed to be?
When you boil, I'm going to go over that.
Oh, okay, sorry.
But when you get past syrup, or if the level gets down to the point where there isn't like I like to maintain at least an inch or so on my pan, and I try to keep it low. Ideally, when I come to add when I add stuff in, my sap line is somewhere between these two lines I cut, and each of those lines actually is equal to 3 gallon increase. So when I add it, it goes to the same level and above. So I try to keep it kind of like here when I add and here when I, or sorry, here when I add and here.
You're like, oh, it's brown, it's syrup.
Well, yeah, I mean, late stuff, it's different colors too. Yeah, I'll go over that.
Okay.
We're going to cover that one. If you buy a commercial one that's made for production, they have these grooves cut into them. And again, that lets even more heat get up into it. So concentrating the heat. And usually systems that have those then have a finish pan in the front. And the way they work is it's sent through it at a zigzag. So you actually, as it's moving through, it actually turns, it's more syrupy toward the end.
Yeah.
So that's why those guys are able to draw off constantly. Because essentially when this turns into syrup, they draw off. And you'll notice those bubbles.
Yeah.
Those are, I call those syrup bubbles. It's getting close when you start to see that.
That's what overflowed on your stove, right?
Yeah. And you can use oil-based things. Canola oil is kind of the commonly used one, I think. Do you guys use canola oil?
We use organic sunflower oil.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Organic.
So you can add oil, like just barely a tiny amount will help settle those bubbles down. So
The party I was telling you about throws eggs into it.
Yeah, so that's kind of like an old school Vermont tradition to do that. I wouldn't do that at anything you're trying to sell something, but it is kind of like an old.
That's like in the rule book.
Yeah, right. So this is generally what they look like when they're put together. This one actually has a steam away, so it's a whole nother system that preheats and uses the excess heat that otherwise would have been to actually kind of induce a premature boil as well. So production and then finishing in the front if you get bigger.
How does it flow? Do you have to make it flow to each pan, or is it an automatic?
There's usually a thing on the side right here,
Okay,
actually,
like a valve.
and it's so everything in here flows into this pan, and then from there into there, and in this pan you have a float, so a thing that floats on the sap, and it's connected to the valve that lets the sap into that. So as it drops, the valve opens, and then it closes when it gets to a certain height. So it maintains that right height. Cool. If you want to buy a commercial one, the smallest one you can get, this is a 2 by 2.5, same size pan I use, and these are the prices if you buy commercial from Leader anyway, brand new. Pretty expensive. Mine cost me $40.
I'll take one.
The pan itself cost me $200, so I guess it was $240 for the whole. But this is a much more efficient system than I have. And actually, both of them have a preheater right here in the back.
And that's heated by wood?
Yes. Yep. Rob just told me about this company. This is a much more reasonable price. I think they said they're having a deal right now, $750.
Yeah,
$750.
$750. Yeah.
What's really cool about these though is that pan comes off and a grill goes on top for an extra, I think it's $45, turns into a grill in the summer.
That's my Christmas.
And this is made by like a local Vermont family, it's not a company there. Pretty cool. Yeah, well, I kind of had heard about them, but Rob introduced me to them. We're hoping that they'll come here one day for a future one of these.
I really want that. That looks cool.
So how much wood do you need? I mean, again, it's going to depend on the system and your setup and how efficient it is. But on average, they say 1/4 of good dry wood for about 100 taps. That's on like one of those more commercial style systems. If you want to switch to softwood, because you have to have softwood, you're looking at more like 40 taps per cord. I use mostly pine just because I'm getting rid of pine, but I mix hardwood in with it. It burns real quick and real hot, but every time you open that door, you lose a little bit of efficiency because your heat comes out. So that's one of the main besides the coals, is one of the main advantages to using hardwood, is that you can leave that door shut longer, and so you maintain that efficiency, assuming that it's all sealed up well. And just so you know, a cord of wood is about 128 cubic feet, and all that's in there. We're starting to run over time, so I'm going to start speeding up here. How do you know when syrup is done? The best way is to use a hydrometer. It's the most accurate, and they look like this. So it's a device that is weighted at the bottom that floats in the syrup, and you can either use it in a big bucket or you can get one of these things. I use one of those, and you're going to spend about $60 for one of those for a good one. I was told that be really careful. I've never heard of it happening, but I guess the paper slipped here recently.
Yeah.
So I was advised to tell folks to maybe take, because there's a paper inside that glass essentially, and it's supposed to be glued there, but maybe make a mark where part of the paper is so it doesn't happen
So
again.
when like that all those bubbles start, you could pour some in that, and then you'll see if it's.
I do, yeah, and then you
Okay.
float it in it, and there's
Okay.
2 readings on it. One you'll see here, it has these 2 red readings on it. One is for when it's hot and while you're boiling, and one is for
Okay.
when it's cold, so you can measure it when it's
Okay.
cold. The density changes depending on the temperature. There's other ways to do it if you don't want to spend the money on that. You can do it by temperature, but it's not completely accurate. You have to calibrate it. Water boils at different temperatures depending on the pressure, and that is included with syrup. And water won't go above a certain temperature while it's boiling. As the sugar content increases, you'll actually see the temperature of it go up. So if you measure the temperature of boiling water, which is an average of 219 degrees Fahrenheit. If you increase that amount, so you'd have to boil water, measure the temperature, and then add 7.5 degrees Fahrenheit, and then that would tell you when it's syrup as well. The other way is the old school way. It's called the sheeting trick. So, which is what he's doing. I tried my hardest to find a good picture of it, but I couldn't. If you have some kind of flat surface, even a spoon would work. You dip it in and you pick it up and you look at the syrup dripping off of it. And you'll see like droplets when it's not syrup, and you'll start to see this kind of thick sheeting effect happening right when it starts to turn syrup. It's probably, unless you're really good, it's probably the least accurate way to do it. But you can do it if you want to use buckets and be like your grandfather and make eggs in there. Syrup.
And hot dogs, right?
Hot dogs, yeah. So really quick, last little bit here. Filtering. A lot of people don't realize this is a pretty important step to do. This is the easiest, cheapest way to do it. Is to use what's called a cone filter and pre-filters as well. So it can plug up quick, and you want to run your syrup through it hot. And this is the most frustrating part of my operation. I've built this crazy looking thing that looks like this that I build in like 2 seconds, and then it comes apart and the wood gets used for something else, and then I rebuild it. But essentially I cut the bottom of a food grade bucket out, poked nails through it, and connected my cone filter with that, and I filled it with the pre-filters. I like to fill it with pre-filters because they get plugged, and when they plugged, I can like wring one. I can like wring it out to help it, and some of the stuff comes out of that, but not all of it. And then the next filter, and then take it out, and then the next filter can handle it. Plus, a bunch of filters means it gets filtered multiple times. And on my system, I take syrup, I boil it all down till it's almost syrup, and then I filter it, and then it goes into. Actually, I think the next one was going to show it going in. Yeah, it was. It goes into a finish pan I bought, and then I finish it off on that and can it with that unit. And if you think you're just going to skip that, let me show you what the filter looked like this year after I filtered my syrup through. That was about 4.5 gallons of syrup went through that filter, and that's what it looked like after. But it does look good once you finish that. This is my syrup last year.
Pan heated?
Yeah, I've got a better picture of it when I get to canning. But yeah, it runs on propane.
Okay.
And I kind of spent more money than I probably should have on it. My wife wasn't too thrilled. But my hope is that my dad will one day let me get bigger, and then I can use that. So bottling and storing syrup. The first couple of years, and the other reason I did it too, the first couple of years I did this, I didn't have a good canning unit. So I made the syrup and it just went in the fridge because I wasn't able to bottle it properly. And what I mean by that is you should be putting it into a container at between 185 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit. That kills any microorganisms that are in the container. Shut it up, put it aside, and then you can stick it like fine wine in your basement until you use it. So it's been fantastic to not have 6 gallons of syrup in my fridge
Yeah.
since I bought that thing. I just talked about that. If you want to sell it, there are laws with that, and I just thought I'd share those really quick. The first one is that you need to can at those temperatures I just listed above. You need to have an address label on your syrup container, and you need to grade it using the Vermont grading system, which I'm not going to get into because we don't have time. And if you want to make candy just for fun, it's made at 32 degrees above the boiling point of water. So again, you got to measure water and then start your candy. But make sure you look at a recipe. You got to stir it and all sorts of other things. This is the unit I have. Cost me $500, so it was pretty expensive. But man, I like having it.
That's the finishing.
I use it to finish.
Okay.
And then as soon as it hits syrup, I put the top on it. That way it can't evaporate anymore.
Okay.
And then I can.
Okay.
So this is a canning finishing kind of combo.
I'm doing it right out of the finishing pot and filtering all the way, but.
Is it hitting that right temperature? When
Oh,
it
yeah,
goes?
no, it's
Okay.
hitting the, I just have a filtering system, but I filter like the sap before, I'm filtering a lot.
That's good. I mean, I didn't, which is why that filter looks so dirty.
Okay.
But most of the guys will filter sap as it comes in,
Yeah.
and different, you know.
Okay.
Some
Just-
people go through multiple filters. I'm kind of lazy.
I know it has to be super,
just do it once.
hot, and have it sealed. I have the screw-on tops and.
Yeah,
sealed.
and they make a, if you really want to get commercial, they make a, what the heck's it, what's that
Filter
called?
press.
Thank you, Rob. Filter press. And it runs on a pump and goes through a bunch of different filters, and it goes quick and fast. But they're like $1,300 new.
So if you don't
When I'm
filter
looking
it
for a small
properly,
one.
does the sediment or whatever that is?
It'll settle on the
sink to
bottom.
You still get sugar sand at the bottom. I get a little bit.
I do too.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but if you use those filter presses, you
Okay.
generally don't.
Okay.
Yeah, or if you're a hardcore multi-filter.
I just don't want to
person.
kill anybody.
Yeah.
That's what
The
she's
most
here.
important thing.
That's why I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, you won't kill them. It just
Okay.
be grainy.
Okay.
You know, have a bunch of nutrients and other things. You know, there's a lot of nutrients in that sap. It's not just sugar. And you're concentrating it down quite a bit. Yeah, so.
You go into mason jars?
Yeah, mason jar is fine. So long as it's entering the mason jar at that temperature, it'll kill
Right.
whatever's in it.
Right.
Good point. Here you go. Just for that. For some more. Yay!
I want another one.
All right. We've made it to the end, finally. Any questions?
Why is my syrup light?
Light, so there's a ton of factors that go into the grade a syrup is, and that's essentially what it is. You have a better grade is lighter syrup.
Oh,
Yeah.
see?
There's a lot of theories out there. I don't know all the studies. Rob probably knows more about that than I do.
Yeah, well, I think the primary determinant is the microbial content. You
Right.
know, so it's what the tree's giving you.
Okay.
And we usually see like a little dark run that kicks off the season, and
Yeah, my
then
first one was dark.
it slowly lightens up for a while over the course of the season, and then as things are shutting down, it darkens up
Oh, okay.
for us again usually.
Cool. That was the
And then if you ever, like sometimes you finish a boil and something sits in the pan, and if it sits long enough before it finishes, then things tend to darken up a little bit then as well.
I think the caramelization of the sugar can affect it too.
Yeah, that's what the sitting, that latch
Okay.
bit in the front pan, because it
Right.
boils so slow.
Sitting while it's boiling.
Yeah, exactly. So it's not doing that fast boil. It's sitting on a hot box for a long time.
So I boil in one thing, and I generally, I mean, that's kind of as late as I end up,
Okay.
really. That's kind of like a medium. This is really dark,
Yeah.
but it tastes pretty good.
Yeah.
What's the capacity of your finishing unit with the propane? How much syrup do you have in there?
I mean, the less you have, the more efficient that boil would be. But I generally draw off. You don't really draw off for the system like mine, but generally draw off twice in a season, once in the middle and once at the end. But I'm dealing with 9-10 gallons or something in my big pan at a time, and trying to make 3 gallons of syrup out of it. So it boils in that pan for a long time before it goes into that finishing can. But the main reason I like it is because I can put that top on it. It no longer evaporates, and I can use it for canning. Was the big reason for me, not having it in my fridge. And my system doesn't. I put those copper pipes you saw in it myself, and the hole is like too hot. I don't know. It just doesn't work. It doesn't work that good. Any other questions?
I was just gonna say that even in the big operation, we finish most of it on propane. The other big advantage is you can turn it off.
That's the other one. Yeah.
You can't turn off the firebox, So if you draw off your wood-fired operation early and finish on propane, you just get an added measure of control. Because if things are moving faster than you want, you just turn off the tank and everything's okay. Yeah.
And I should say too, with an operation like mine, you wouldn't want to draw off while the fire's still going. You would drop that level down, and then it would start to caramelize and then ruin your whole pan. So it cools down, and then I heat it back up, actually on like a little propane burner, put it through my filters, and then finish it on my. And I usually finish the first batch while I'm starting to boil the second.
When do you take it off to add to your finisher? What reading for hydrometer or what temperature?
I don't use a hydrometer. I start looking for syrup bubbles.
So you just start looking for the
It's a
bubbles?
combination of syrup bubbles and boy, I want syrup and I haven't had any. I'm just gonna finish this one.
And I'm tired and I want to go to bed.
I mean, for me, it's fun. I've got the bug. They say you get the sugaring bug, but don't have the time or financial to get bigger. So right now, for me,
Yeah.
6 gallons is good.
And when's the state gonna really start cracking down? Because I've heard like they're gonna be inspecting sugar houses, even bottling, like labels, they're gonna have to start putting RO, like this is RO, it's gone through an RO first.
Yeah, we didn't even talk about ROs.
Yeah, so do you know anything about
I don't deal on the.
in the commercial end?
Yeah, I mean, I do deal with sugar bushes on a regular basis on the
Yeah.
forestry side of it, but not that. That's kind of the ag department's.
And they don't care about like the plastic being out in the woods?
Those lines.
Yeah, like,
It doesn't hurt the tree. It looks. I mean,
there's, they just have, like being Vermont and caring about so much the environment, there's just all this plastic lines sitting out there for years, like.
Yeah, there's some. I've heard people talking about because some people are lazy about it.
Yeah,
and
they'll leave.
when they cut their whatever or there's a repair, they just let it drop on the ground.
Mhm.
I don't know what the effects of that
They
are.
haven't really.
I mean, it's a petroleum-based. Plastic is made out of petroleum. It's got to have something, but I don't know.
They haven't really. It would hurt the state too much. Basically,
I
turn the other way.
I don't know if it negatively affects it other
Yeah.
than, and I don't know, I'm not an expert on that, but
Yeah.
I don't know if it negatively affects other than aesthetics.
Yeah.
And generally, the state itself, as far as my department goes, is more worried about forest health and
Yeah.
wildlife habitat as opposed to aesthetics.
Does it impact the wildlife habitat? I mean, you're restricting where animals can go, right?
And they're eating.
Well,
Some are eating it.
my experience has been that like a moose doesn't care; it just walks right through them. I haven't seen a deer moving through a sugar bush, so I'm not too sure.
Confused.
I would assume the main lines would make them duck and weave. Yeah, I don't know.
Just curious.
Yeah, I would say if you're an operator that likes to clean the understory of because you like to be able to maintain your line, that's definitely affecting wildlife if you're doing that. You're limiting kind of the more important habitat on that forest floor habitat. But as far as the line restricting movement, I'm not. For all I know, it might help squirrel populations breed or something. I don't know. I haven't seen any studies on it.
Is there a ratio of, if you're doing buckets, a ratio of taps to diameter of the trunk or something like that?
Yeah, we went over that.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. No, I'm
I was
glad
late
you
to the
asked
party.
that. If I was to get one thing across today, that's the one thing I wanted to get across. Boy, you know what? Here.
If it's in there, I'll find it.
One of the handouts is a tapping guideline, and there is a section right here that if you want to maintain a healthy tree, shows you what diameter they should be for the amount of taps.
Perfect.
Any other questions? Yeah.
In leasing a sugar bush, is it generally a practice year to year or longer term?
Depends on the
3 years,
agreement
5 years?
between you and your sugar maker. I've seen long-term ones, and I've seen ones that last a few years. If you're a sugar maker and you want to put a vacuum system up and you want to invest in lines, you're not going to want to take that all down in a
Oh,
year.
that's what I,
So it's completely
that's
dependent.
individual then.
Yeah, I mean, if as a landowner, I would want a lease, a written agreement between me and that sugar maker, and I would want things like that spelled out.
Thank you, Merck Forest, for co-hosting. I am here representing the Vermont Woodlands Association, who, if you want to learn more, we have some brochures there, but basically getting landowners and non-landowners to realize how important forests are in the state, and if you care about what's happening now, we send legislative update emails and then e-news, which tells you about events like this. And it's on our website too, but membership based. And we work a lot with groups like this to try to get people interested in their forests. So.